So, I'm not usually the power scaling type, and I do not intend to make a habit out of it, but I've seen this particular question popping up on Resident Evil forums ever since Village. I think it's mostly died down since Resident Evil 4 Remake released, but I've seen it often enough that I've decided I want to talk about it. Could Ethan Winters beat the rest of the Resident Evil protagonists in a fight? Mostly Leon. I mean, I've seen people say that Ethan would beat any of the RE protagonists, including Chris, Jill, and Claire, but 9 times out of 10, they specifically pit him against Leon for some reason. So Leon's mostly who I'm going to talk about in this video. But everything I have to say about him, I would more or less apply to Chris, Jill, and Claire as well. Also, before we start, fair warning, if you're not the type of person who gives a flying fuck about which virtual action figure would win in a fight if you threw them both into the Beyblade ring, and I get it, then this is your opportunity to click off the video. Have a nice sex life. As for the rest of us, let's talk about whether Ethan actually stands a chance against Leon Kennedy. Now, I don't think I really need to go over the skill difference between Leon and Ethan. I feel like most people understand that that's pretty one-sided. The crux of the question mostly always comes down to Ethan's supposed healing factor. The idea being that even if Leon can beat Ethan in a fight, Ethan could just regenerate and come back, or withstand all attacks and heal from any wounds Leon deals, essentially winning in a war of attrition. But this belief, I think, comes from a gross misunderstanding of how Ethan's abilities actually work. Long story short, no, he does not regenerate. I mean, he does obviously have a healing factor, as in his wounds will heal closed quickly, and in fact, it's fast-acting enough that it can actually be observed in real time. But I've seen people talking about Ethan's powers as if he were basically Deadpool, where if you give him enough time, he can just regenerate from anything. People will go so far as to use words like indestructible or even immortal to describe him, which is not even a little bit true. So why do people think this? Well, there are a few reasons I think people overestimate his ability to heal. Firstly, many people seem to mistake his healing factor with that of Jack Baker's, who was also infected with the Mutamycete, and Jack actually is described in-game as immortal, and is shown to be capable of regenerating from injuries that would give Wolverine a run for his money. But if you're paying attention, you will note that the Mutamycete affects different people in different ways. Jack may have been given a regenerative healing factor on par with Deadpool, but he's an exception. Donna Beneviento, for example, died just from a stab to the face. Even bosses like Marguerite and Lucas died much more easily than Jack. As does Ethan, but we'll get to that in a minute. Secondly, during the climax of Village, Miranda tears Ethan's heart out. Ethan then passes out, but he gets back up later and continues fighting. I think this scene in particular is mostly to blame for people's misunderstanding of how Ethan's abilities work. Despite what the Resident Evil wiki will have you believe, Ethan does not regenerate from getting his heart ripped out. Like, he didn't grow it back or anything, like some people seem to think. He just didn't die from it.
I've never seen a human live without his heart.
Well, not right away, that is, but he was actively dying.
But Ethan, are you sure of this? Your body is, well, falling apart. Mr. Winters, I'm afraid you can't return to your old world any longer. Are you ready?
I mean, why do you think he chose to stay and detonate the bomb? It was a remote bomb. The whole point was to detonate it at a safe distance. The reason he stayed was because he knew he was going to die anyway.
Ethan, he did it. It's finished.
I think we've finished each other.
He had taken too much damage and was honestly just kind of running on fumes at that point. So, TLDR, Ethan is not immortal. He can die if he takes sufficient damage, and cannot regenerate lost body parts, as is also evident by his fingers, which did not grow back. If he has first aid medication, he can reattach his limbs, but he's not going to be able to pull that off in the middle of active combat.
Running will get you nowhere!
So, now that we've covered that, let's address what would actually happen in a fight between Ethan Winters and Leon Kennedy. Well, in terms of marksmanship, it's not even close. Ethan has never been shown to be capable of the same skill with a firearm as Leon. And beyond that, Leon would be far quicker on the draw. Ethan did get some vague military training in between 7 and 8, but Leon has had decades worth of training and combat experience, whereas Ethan has only had a few years of training at most, and only in his free time, obviously. You know, interspersed between spending time with his family and working at his good old 9-to-5 as a systems engineer. Yeah, Ethan has guns too, and would try to shoot back at him, but to Leon, getting shot at is nothing new. He deals with that all the time, that's just another day ending with Y. The same is true for the other protagonists. Ah, but, I hear you say, wouldn't Ethan just be able to tank Leon's gunshots? I mean, he survived for a while after getting his heart torn out after all. Well, no, I don't think he would. Much like a zombie, Ethan can survive a lot of bodily dismemberment. But let me ask you this. What's to stop Leon from simply blowing Ethan's head off with a shotgun, or one of his many magnums? Because believe it or not, that would absolutely kill Ethan. He can take a lot of abuse, but he can't survive decapitation. And Leon isn't exactly opposed to shooting straight for the head either, especially if Ethan were to take cover, revealing only his head so he could fire back, which Leon would absolutely be able to hit without effort. Or if Leon managed to close the distance between them, which probably wouldn't be very difficult for him. After all, Ethan's not going to just shrug off a gunshot to the face. What's to stop Leon from slicing Ethan's limbs off with a kitchen knife, which he could do very easily?
Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left!
Sure, Ethan could reattach them, theoretically, but Leon isn't really the type to play around with his enemies like Jack, or slowly lore walk closer like Dimitrescu. So what exactly is Ethan gonna do in that scenario? Bleed on him?
I'm invincible! You're a loony.
Ah, but I hear you say, what if we took their weapons away and made it a fist fight? And yes, I know it may be hard to believe, but I have in fact seen people suggesting that Ethan could beat Leon in hand-to-hand combat. I'm not making this up. So let's talk about that. Obviously, Leon could outskill Ethan in hand-to-hand. But again, that's not really the crux of the argument. The real question is, would Leon be able to deal melee attacks capable of actually killing Ethan? Well, as a matter of fact, this really should go without saying, but making this a CQC fight would only give Leon an even greater chance against Ethan. In terms of strength and skill, Leon takes this easy. I mean, he held back the killing blows of Maria Gomez, for example, who was strong enough to punch through concrete and ultimately beat her in hand-to-hand. But throw in the fact that his melee attacks are capable of decapitation, which again, Ethan cannot survive, and this is truly one-sided. Look, just to be clear, none of this is to diminish Ethan as a character at all. Despite the fact that he's apparently supposed to be an average Joe, he's actually incredibly competent in a fight. Ethan is, by all accounts, a certified badass. But he's a badass from an era of the series that is trying its best to be realistic and grounded. And that's just not the era that Leon is from. Or any of the other RE protagonists for that matter. They're like Dark Souls characters, honestly. Sure, the things they're fighting could probably one or two shot them, but like, you know, just don't get hit. Unlike a certain someone, they're pretty good at it. Remember the Fat Molded, who were basically boss fights in Resident Evil 7? Yeah, this is how Chris handles them.
All right, we'll call it a draw.